excited to gather again around the text and see what God has for us this evening. So, if you have a Bible, if you need a Bible, there are Bibles that are on that chair there, so that I would encourage people to have a text available, since we will be looking at the book of Micah. And we will pick up today and take a new run at the text. 2 months ago, you'll remember that what we did was we took the classic mercy and justice verse that everybody always quotes, which is Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O human, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And although we quoted, and it's a wonderful verse, it's also important that we remember that it is not a verse floating in space, detached from any context. So last time we looked in more detail at 6:1-8, which is presented in the form, the prophet picked up on the form of a lawsuit, and God takes Israel to court and sues his people for breach of covenant. And there's much more richness to 6:8 than just quoting 6:8 itself. There's a lot more there. So what we had talked about between the steering committee of the Mercy and Justice Network and myself was then spending the other 4 times every other month this year looking at different aspects of the book of Micah that have to do with social justice, that have to do with concerns that intersect where the overlap with where the Mercy and Justice Network does its work. So what we're going to do tonight is go back to the beginning of the book, and we're going to, in the next 4 sessions, successively move forward through the book with a focus on different areas of pertinence to this. And it's interesting because although everybody just likes to quote 6:8, there's really a tremendous amount in the book of Micah, and really in many of the other prophets, that's very relevant to concerns for people who are overlooked, oppressed, downtrodden, and it's important that we see that. And it's very easy to become comfortable in society in America and overlook those kinds of needs, yet the prophets continue to prod us to care, be concerned, show compassion, and take action. And so what does that look like when we're given a biblical shove, an inspired, Holy Spirit-guided shove from the Lord in that direction? So I hope that's what we'll start to see. So what I want to do tonight is pick up at the beginning of the book of Micah. And you'll remember last time that I just shared very briefly as we started, and for those who are new this time, go over this again, that the whole book of Micah is arranged around a particular theme. It's really a book that takes as its heart message the idea that God restores what's broken. He takes what's fragmented, brings it back together. He takes what's fractured, shattered, hurting, and wants to bind together and bring healing. That's the kind of God he is. And that's what drives each section of the book of Micah along. So evidently, because all these prophetic oracles have to do with this theme of God as a restorer, God as somebody who knits back together, it must have been a theme that really meant a lot to Micah. And it really meant a lot to him probably because his society in his day in Judah, late 8th century, so this like 730 to 700 BC, was so fragmented, torn apart, and broken. And we'll see, we'll get our first glimpse into that, trying to read between the lines and figure out what was going on. So what I want to do is, as we fly in tonight to the 8th century BC and hope to bring it back to the 21st century, I want to walk us through the first chapter. And then I'm going to turn you loose on a passage in chapter 2 that addresses some situations that sound like they could be Champaign County 2015, and then come back together, let you share about that, and then look at the final part of this section of the book, which contains a startling answer, really, to the problems that are raised in the first part. So, this is a book about a restoring God. So what do we find? Chapters 1 and 2 are all focused on a particular theme, as you'll see. But I'm not going to tell you the theme yet, because we're going to look at the problem first. So as we begin in chapter 1, we see the prophet lay out for us all the consequences of the sins that we commit. And so I'm going to give you first of all, an outline here, just so you have some glance at my thoughts and thought structure. You can see what we're looking at, because I want to go through this first chapter fairly directly. So we begin with the superscription. 1:1. The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, the vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. So the superscription sets this down in time. We are in real time and space. We are in history. We know right where we are in history. And that's valuable not just to be able to recite a date for Micah, but because we know some things about society, both from other places in the Bible and from archaeology, that give us a clue to a number of the issues that were being faced. So we begin with chapter 1, verses 2 through 7. In this first vignette, it's really, the separate paragraphs are usually referred to as oracles when it's a prophet. His first oracle here, from 2 to 7, the Lord arrives for judgment. Talk about a threatening scene. God descends from heaven to earth to punish the people. So look at verse 2 with me. Hear, O peoples, all of you. Listen, O earth, and all who are in it. That's pretty comprehensive, who we're summoning here. That the sovereign Lord may witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Ooh, this is also rather ominous sounding. I really don't want God to take me to court, because I will lose, guaranteed. And God says, I'm coming, and now he descends. Verses 3 and 4. Look, the Lord is coming from his dwelling place. He comes down and treads the high places of the earth. So God is a colossus, if you will, who leaves his heavenly dwelling and comes down to the earth. And he comes first onto the very highest places. And he treads on them or tramples those most impressive mountain ranges. The mountains melt beneath him and the valleys split apart. Like wax before the fire, like water rushing down a slope. Meet the judge. He's here. And everything disintegrates at his arrival. As he steps onto the mountains, they're melting. The valleys are splitting further. It's like wax. It's like water going down the slope. Nothing is going to hold together. Nothing has any lasting validity or stability because he's arrived. So, why? Why is this happening? This sounds horrible. The reasons are found in our choices. Look at the accusation in 5. It's an accusation that's also an explanation. All this is because of Jacob's transgression, because of the sins of the house of Israel. What is Jacob's transgression? Jacob just being another way of referring to the Israelites. Is it not Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, Israel? What is Judah, the southern kingdom's high place? Is it not Jerusalem, the capital of the southern kingdom? And of course, what's a high place? It suggests What is it?
Idolatry.
Idolatry. It's a place you go to worship a Baal or an Asherah at a nice high place, a mountain, a hill, up high. So, it sounds like we're in trouble for idolatry. There's your first hint of what the sins might have been. But there's more to come. 6 and 7. Here's the sentence, the consequences. Because of whatever the mass of sin is, and at least part of it's linked to the fact that they don't give heed to God. They're giving heed to other gods. They've replaced God. God announces coming destruction and what the judgment's going to entail. Verse 6. Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley and lay bare her foundations. All her idols will be broken to pieces. All her temple gifts will be burned with fire. I will destroy all her images, since she gathered her gifts from the wages of prostitutes. As the wages of prostitutes, they will again be used. So, here's the proud capital city of the northern kingdom, Samaria. God is coming down. Everything falls apart when he steps on it. And he's coming because of what's happened. It's evidently been centered on, driven by, or emanated from the capitals, which might give you a hint of some of the source of this, that it's coming from the top down. We go to the capital first. There may be an issue with leadership that we'll need to look at. But God says, therefore, verse 6, because of this, I'm going to completely flatten Samaria. The proud city will put a vineyard there. It's a heap of rubble. All the stones over the edge and into the valley. And the idols, there's the idols again. They pick up on the high places in the south, now in the north. They've got idols. God says, let's shatter them. All the temple gifts brought for the idols, burned up. I'll destroy all her images. So idolatry seems to be running through this. There's an issue in the heart commitment not being devoted to the Lord God, to the true God. And there's some issue of prostitution here, which may be connected with the worship of a false god. In that culture, there were actually different religious cults that incorporated sexual intercourse as part of the worship. And again, the prophets uniformly denounce this. Don't confuse this with truth. So as you can see, this initial passage starts at the heights. We're in heaven, God's dwelling place. He comes down to the earth. It disintegrates. Why is it disintegrating? It's because of the sin, verse 5, and then the sentence pronounced is the eradication, is the razing of the proud leadership capital of the northern kingdom, Samaria. So emotionally and even visually, it's as if our gaze goes from heaven to the mountains, down to the valleys. Samaria, totally flattened. We've looked further and further down. This is a horrible scene. What a way to introduce a book here. But that's what we have. Look at the response. 8 to 16 is the prophet's response. It is a response of lament. It's a response of sorrow over the coming punishment. So, we begin in 8 and 9 with him telling how he's reacting. He's very self-disclosing here. 8, his reaction. Because of this, I will weep and wail. I will go about barefoot and naked. I will howl like a jackal and moan like an owl. Okay, he's describing himself as a mourner. Why? We'll look at 9. For her wound is incurable. It has come to Judah. Now we're back in the southern kingdom. And of course, you remember that from 1:1, Micah's from Moresheth Gath, which is in the south in Judah. So this is home for him. And most of this is going to be directed to issues in the southern kingdom of Judah. It has reached the very gate of my people, even coming to Jerusalem itself. So he says, let me explain. I'm torn up. I'm wailing about this because it has penetrated my people, even Jerusalem, even the capital. It has so thoroughly gone through all layers of society. Well, what? We don't quite know yet, other than the hint that there's a lot of replacing God with other objects of loyalty and allegiance, idols. And to make his point, the prophet gives you his lament in 10 to 16. It is a picture of dissolution and disaster in poetic form. But to understand this, you have to understand that in the Hebrew culture, one way of making your point so people would retain it was to use word plays. It's essentially a poem of puns. But they're not funny puns, they're puns that punch us directly in the face and leave the concepts ringing in our ears. So he begins in verse 10 to describe this. And so what you've got in 8 and 9, you had his reaction, I'm going to lament this, I'm going to cry loudly. And he explains it. It's because this evil's reached Judah. Oh my heavens, it's even to the capital, Jerusalem. In 10 through 12, he makes a series of puns on city names that describe the disaster that's unfolding for the cities. Then in 12c to 13, he explains it. And he explains it in terms that what has happened has reached Jerusalem coming through the city of Lachish, echoing the explanation he gave in 9. Then in 14 and 15, he goes back to his pun poem of describing the disaster coming to the cities. And then in 16, he says, y'all ought to join me in crying because this is so bad. So we start in 10. And just a note, here's the northern kingdom, Israel. Here's the southern kingdom, Judah. Jerusalem's the capital. The city names that Micah picks out are all in this region of Judah, which if we enlarge, you can see, again, here's Jerusalem, the capital. They're southwest of Jerusalem or west of Jerusalem, basically. And Moresheth is one of them. His hometown is in this region, so he picks up on all the little towns around him. It would be like you or me composing a lament that picks up on Bloomington Normal and Decatur, Monticello and Mahomet, St. Joe and Charleston and all the disasters that are coming to them. We pick it up based on where we live, and that's what Mike is doing. So his towns. Well, let's look at the text again. Let me just walk us through this without belaboring it. Tell it not in Gath, which in Hebrew, the word tell sounds just like Gath. Weep not at all. In Beit Ophrah, which means house of dust, roll in the dust. Pass on in nakedness and shame, you who live in Shafir, which is a Hebrew word meaning beautiful. You're naked and ashamed, you who live in Beauty Town. Those who live in Za'anan, which sounds just like the Hebrew verb come out, will not come out. You who live in Burst Out Town won't be able to get out the gate. Beit Edzel, which means house of help, is in mourning. Its protection is taken from you. Those who live in Marot, which sounds like the word for bitter, writhe in pain, waiting for relief. Then the explanation. Because disaster has come from the Lord, even to the gate of Jerusalem. It's right in the center, the heart of our culture. You who live in Lachish, which by the way sounds just like the Hebrew word for team, as in team of horses, harness the team to the chariot. To prepare for battle, maybe the picture, or to get out of there. Probably it's to prepare for battle. But why did Lachish get drawn in? You were the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for the transgressions of Israel were found in you. The transgressions of the northern kingdom somehow had been picked up and lived out in the city of Lachish, and from there, people in Jerusalem got hold of them, and it came. Then, 14 and 15, back to the puns. Therefore you will give parting gifts to Moresheth Gath, hometown for Micah. Moresheth sounds like bride, or fiancé actually, in Hebrew. And parting gifts is seemingly a pun on a dowry, the gifts that are given at the time of a marriage. The town of Achzib, which sounds just like the word deception, will prove deceptive to the kings of Israel. I'll bring a conqueror against you who live in Mareshah, which sounds like conqueror in Hebrew. I'll bring a conqueror against Conquer Town. Conquest city will be conquered. He who is the glory of Israel will come to Adullam, which is not a sound pun, but actually evokes history, because it's the place where David escaped when he was fleeing Saul. He who is the glory of Israel, which is a clear reference to a king, somebody in power, goes to Adullam. Why? Probably because they're fleeing all of the chaos and disintegration. Conclusion. This is so bad you all ought to be weeping with me. Shave your heads in mourning for the children in whom you delight. Make yourselves as bald as the vulture, for they will go from you into exile. Ooh, he looks ahead. Okay, this is 8th century. Jerusalem is going to be intact until 587. So it's looking ahead and saying what's playing out in the culture means you will leave the land, you'll lose the land, you'll be defeated, everything will be destroyed, you'll lose all you've held, all you thought was yours. It's going to play out. It's going to keep getting worse. They'll go from you into exile, your children. So in other words, it's your descendants. It's looking into the future. Now, on your outline, on the back of the outline, I did give you a little chart about the puns in 8 to 16. If any of you are interested in that, you can look at that further. I figured that may be a non-starter for some people and fascinating to others. So I put it there so if you want to think about the puns and if you want to talk about it more, you can ask me afterwards. But I'm not going to belabor it right now because many people will want to go hide if I do that. So the first chapter ends with a rather pungent poem. An attempt to bring the effect into English you have on the outline there, but I'll show it to you up here. Tell it not in Tellington, wail not in wailing. Dust manor will eat dirt, dressy town flee naked, safe fold will not save, Walchester's walls are down, a bitter dose drinks Bitterton. Towards Jerusalem, city of peace, the Lord sends war. Harness the war steeds, O men of Barstead, Zion's beginning of sinning, equal to Israel's crimes. To welfare a last farewell, for trapping trapped Israel's kings. Sort of a loose rendering, but reminiscent, and trying to bring it into English in a way that picks up on the punniness, the word plays, as we go through the passage. And again, it's not to be funny that he's punning. These are word plays to keep your attention. You got to think of the prophet giving this in public and people hearing it and not being able to forget it, because he's taking all these word plays that associate the names of the cities around with horrible things that are coming, with disasters that will ensue because the sin has become so deeply entrenched in society. Chapter 2. Here's where you come in again, besides being patient with me. I'm going to divide into smaller groups here for a moment and think about Chapter 2 before we come back together. And I've given you a few guiding questions here. Chapter 2 has 3 parts, and we're going to look at the first 2 of those parts. 1 to 5 and 6 to 11. There is an accusation in the first 5 verses, and there is another set of accusations in 6 to 11. So I want you to think about what's the prophet accusing people of, and how are these 2 segments here similar and different? Bounce them off of each other. Think about the way he uses irony and sarcasm, and how does God get involved in this scene? Because it's awfully easy to misread a prophet by seeing the prophet as all about him as the prophet and the people he preaches to, and forget that God is actually the central player here. How's God involved in this? And then to ask you to do your detective work and your reconstructive thinking as to what do you read through the text is actually happening in Judah. What's going on in the 8th century BC? What can you deduce about the historical setting? What are people doing? Who's doing it? To whom? And why? What's motivating? Then a few moments of discussion about how do we struggle with and face temptation in similar areas? What kind of parallels are there in our culture? And what would the passage suggest you should do about this? And what would you need God to do in this situation? So, there's your questions. I don't know, we probably can do 3 or 4 small groups, just kind of circle around and join with people you may not know as well or be as familiar with. And let's have some talk about